Listen carefully, because what begins here is not just a story about a cycle, but a story about a life that learns how to move again, even after it feels like everything inside has stopped. And in this quiet moment, before the world becomes loud again, there is a simple cycle resting against a wall. Slightly dusty, slightly worn, but still standing, still complete, still waiting. And this cycle is not just metal and wheels. It represents every step you have ever taken in your life. Every moment where you tried. Every moment where you failed. Every time you got back up even when you did not feel like moving at all. And now, standing in front of it, there is a presence. Calm, steady, and powerful. And I, Archangel Michael, stand beside you in this moment, not to push you, not to force you, but to remind you that you are not alone in what you are about to face, because every journey begins with a single decision. And that decision does not require perfection. It only requires courage, and courage does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it feels like a quiet thought saying, try again. And sometimes it feels like fear and courage standing side by side, and you choosing to move anyway. And as the rider places their hand on the handle of the cycle, there is hesitation. A moment of stillness where the mind questions everything, where doubts begin to rise, where memories of past falls come rushing back, where the fear of failing again tries to hold them in place. But in that very moment, something deeper begins to speak, something stronger than fear, something that cannot be silenced by doubt, and that is the voice of forward motion. The voice that says you were never meant to remain still. You were always designed to move, to grow, to evolve, to become more than what you were yesterday. And so, the first push of the pedal happens slowly, almost uncertainly, like a child learning balance for the first time, and the cycle wobbles, slightly unstable, shifting left and right, testing the rider's ability to stay centered. And this is where most people stop. This is where fear convinces them that stopping is safer than continuing. But what they do not understand is that balance is not something you find. It is something you develop through movement. And I stand there, watching, ensuring that even in that moment of instability, the rider does not fall completely, because guidance does not remove challenge. It supports you through it. And as the wheels begin to turn more smoothly, something changes, not outside, but inside. A shift begins to take place. A quiet understanding that movement itself is progress, that even slow progress is still progress, and the path ahead is not perfectly straight. It is uneven, filled with small turns, slight slopes, and moments where effort is required to keep going. And yet with every rotation of the wheel, confidence begins to build. Not loudly, but steadily. Not instantly, but consistently. And this is how strength is formed, not in one moment of success, but in repeated decisions to keep going when it would be easier to stop. And as the cycle moves forward, the environment begins to change. The ground shifts. The air feels different. The rider becomes aware of surroundings in a new way, noticing details that were previously ignored. Small sounds, subtle movements, the feeling of wind brushing against the skin. And in this awareness, there is a realization that life is not something that waits for you to be ready. It is something that moves with or without you. And the only question that remains is whether you will choose to move with it or remain behind. And in this moment, the answer begins to form, not as a loud declaration, but as a quiet commitment to continue, to trust the process, to accept that falling is not the end, but part of the learning. And I, Archangel Michael, stand as a guardian over this process, ensuring that even when the road becomes uncertain, the rider is never abandoned, because every step forward matters, every effort counts, and every moment of willingness to continue is being recorded in the unseen, shaping a future that is still unfolding. And as the journey continues, the cycle becomes more than a machine. It becomes a companion, a reflection, a teacher, showing that life is not about never falling. It is about how many times you choose to rise again. And in this rising, something powerful begins to awaken, something that was always there but needed experience to be revealed. And that is the quiet strength within, the kind that does not need recognition, the kind that does not seek applause, the kind that simply continues, no matter how slow the progress may feel. And as this first part of the journey begins to settle, the rider is no longer the same as when they started, because now they understand something deeply, that moving forward, even imperfectly, is far greater than standing still in fear. And this understanding becomes the foundation for everything that comes next. Now listen closely, because what happens after the first movement is often the most difficult part of the journey, not because the path disappears, but because the mind begins to notice everything it once ignored. And as the rider continues forward on the cycle, the initial excitement slowly transforms into a deeper awareness of effort, of resistance, of the quiet challenges that were always present but hidden beneath the surface of motion. And in this phase, many begin to question themselves, asking silently if they are truly capable of continuing, wondering if the strength they felt moments ago was real or temporary. And this is exactly where I step closer, not to interrupt the process, but to stabilize it, to ensure that doubt does not become the final voice. Because doubt will always try to speak louder when progress begins to matter. And as Archangel Michael stands beside you, there is a steadying force that does not force control but restores balance, reminding you that even when your pace slows, you are still moving forward. Even when the road feels heavier, you are still advancing. And even when your mind tries to convince you that you are stuck, your actions are proving otherwise. And so the cycle continues, the wheels turning with a rhythm that is no longer as shaky as before, but still not perfect, because perfection was never the goal. Growth was, and growth always carries a certain level of discomfort, a feeling that something is stretching, something is being tested, something is being refined. And as the rider moves further along the path, small obstacles begin to appear, not as punishment, but as opportunities. Moments where focus is required, where attention matters, where every slight adjustment of the handle determines stability. And in these moments, the rider begins to understand something powerful. That control is not about eliminating uncertainty, but about responding to it with awareness. And in that awareness, there is strength. A quiet but undeniable strength that begins to replace hesitation. And I am watching, ensuring that every near fall becomes a lesson instead of a loss, ensuring that every moment of imbalance leads to greater understanding rather than fear. Because the purpose of this journey is not just movement, it is transformation. And transformation requires patience. It requires repetition. It requires the willingness to continue even when the results are not immediate. And as the road stretches further, the environment around begins to change. Sometimes smoother, sometimes rougher, sometimes predictable, sometimes completely unexpected. And this unpredictability is not meant to break you. It is meant to shape you, to build adaptability within you, so that no matter what path you encounter later in life, you will not freeze. You will not collapse, but you will adjust, respond, and continue. And there comes a moment in this journey where the rider realizes that the cycle is no longer controlling them. They are controlling the cycle. And this shift is subtle, but powerful, because it marks the transition from hesitation to confidence, from reaction to intention, from fear-driven movement to purpose-driven motion. And in this transition, something deeper awakens within the heart, a quiet sense of trust, not in perfection, but in progress, not in certainty, but in direction. And I, Archangel Michael, reinforce that trust, strengthening it, protecting it, making sure that external voices do not weaken what is being built internally. Because what is being formed here is not temporary. It is foundational, something that will carry you through far greater challenges ahead. And as the journey continues, fatigue may begin to appear, a natural response to effort, a reminder that energy must be managed, that rest is not weakness, but a necessary part of endurance. And so the rider learns to balance movement with pauses, to understand that even in a journey of progress, stillness has its place. And in those brief moments of stillness, reflection begins, allowing the writer to process how far they have come, to recognize that the distance covered is greater than what remains uncertain. And in that realization, gratitude begins to grow. A quiet appreciation for the ability to continue, for the strength that was not always visible but was always present. And as gratitude settles in, the weight of the journey feels lighter, not because the path has changed, but because perception has shifted. And this shift is where true transformation begins to take root, because now the rider is no longer just moving physically, they are evolving mentally and emotionally, understanding that every step forward is part of a larger cycle, a continuous process of growth, learning, and becoming. And I remain with you through all of it, not to rush your progress, not to define your pace, but to ensure that your direction remains aligned with strength, truth, and forward movement. And as this second part of the journey unfolds, you begin to realize that the road ahead is not something to fear, but something to engage with, something to experience, something that reveals more of who you are with every turn of the wheel. And this understanding becomes the foundation for the next stage of the journey, where challenges grow deeper, but so does your strength, where obstacles become more meaningful, but so does your resilience, and where the cycle of movement continues, not just as an action, but as a symbol of everything you are becoming. Now, as the journey continues beyond the point where comfort once existed, the rider begins to enter a phase that feels different, heavier in a subtle way, because now the movement is no longer new, and the excitement that once pushed the first steps forward has settled into something more demanding, something that requires discipline, consistency, and inner strength that does not rely on motivation alone. And in this stage, the cycle moves forward not because it feels easy, but because the rider has chosen to continue, despite difficulty. And this choice becomes the defining force of the entire journey. Because true growth does not happen in moments of ease. It happens in moments where everything inside you questions whether you should keep going, and yet you continue anyway. And I, Archangel Michael, stand closer than before in this stage, not because you are weaker, but because the path ahead requires greater protection, greater clarity, and stronger alignment. And I begin to remove distractions from your path, well, not all at once, but gradually. Because if everything changed instantly, you would not recognize the strength that is being built within you. And so challenges appear in measured ways. Obstacles that test your patience, situations that test your focus, moments that test your decision-making. And each of these is not placed to stop you, but to refine you, to sharpen your awareness, to strengthen your resolve. And as the rider continues to move forward, there is a realization that the cycle is no longer just something being used. It has become something understood, something predictable in motion, yet still demanding attention. And this reflects your life in a deeper sense, where routines begin to form, where effort becomes familiar, where persistence becomes a habit rather than a struggle. And in this transformation, a powerful shift takes place, because what once required force now begins to feel natural. And this natural rhythm is where true mastery begins, not in perfection, but in consistency, not in speed, but in stability. And as you continue riding, you begin to notice something important, that even when the path becomes uneven, even when unexpected turns appear, you are no longer reacting with fear the way you once did. Instead, you are responding with awareness, adjusting your movement, maintaining balance, trusting your ability to adapt. And this is where confidence begins to deepen, not as loud pride, but as quiet certainty, a steady understanding that you are capable of handling what comes next. And I strengthen that understanding, reinforcing your ability to remain calm under pressure, guiding your thoughts so they do not spiral into doubt, and instead remain anchored in clarity, because clarity is what allows movement to remain steady even when circumstances are not. And as time progresses within this journey, there comes a point where the rider begins to reflect, not because something has gone wrong, but because something within has matured. And in that reflection, they begin to see how far they have traveled, not just in distance, but in growth, in understanding, in resilience. And in this awareness, there is a quiet moment of gratitude, not forced, not artificial, but genuine, because now the journey is no longer about proving something. It is about becoming something. And that shift changes everything, because when you are no longer chasing validation, you begin to experience peace in movement itself. And as I stand with you in this part of the journey, I ensure that peace remains accessible, that your mind does not drift into unnecessary anxiety, that your focus remains grounded in what truly matters, and that your steps continue forward with intention, because intention is what separates wandering from progress. And now your movement carries intention. Your decisions carry awareness, and your journey carries meaning. And as the cycle continues forward, the environment around you continues to change, sometimes faster than expected, sometimes slower than desired, but always in alignment with a greater process that you may not fully understand yet, but are becoming prepared to understand. And this preparation is not rushed, because if understanding came too early, it would not have the same impact. And so you are guided through experiences that build patience, through moments that strengthen trust, and through situations that shape your perception, until eventually you begin to realize that the path you feared is not as uncertain as it once seemed, because you are now equipped with the ability to navigate it. And this realization is powerful, because it transforms fear into familiarity, uncertainty into opportunity, and hesitation into action. And as this stage of the journey deepens, I remain beside you, ensuring that you are never overwhelmed beyond your capacity, always providing just enough challenge to keep you growing, always maintaining a balance between difficulty and progress, because growth without challenge does not exist, and challenge without guidance can lead to confusion. But when both are aligned, transformation becomes inevitable, and so you continue forward, the cycle turning, the path unfolding, your strength increasing quietly, steadily, and without needing recognition. And as this part of the journey reaches its close, you stand in a place you could not reach before, not because the path was easy, but because you continued walking it, and now you carry within you a deeper understanding, a stronger foundation, and a clearer sense of direction. And this is only the beginning of what you are becoming. Now, as the journey reaches a point where comfort is no longer even a memory, the rider begins to enter a space where something deeper begins to awaken. A force that is not loud, not chaotic, but incredibly powerful in its silence. And this force is not something that appears from outside. It rises from within, from every moment you chose to continue when stopping felt easier, from every time you resisted doubt, from every time you stayed consistent even when results were not visible. And now that force begins to reveal itself in how you move, how you think, and how you respond to the path ahead, because the cycle is no longer just a tool. It has become an extension of your will. And as the rider continues forward, there comes a moment where the path itself seems to respond differently, as if acknowledging the strength that has been built. And in this moment, I, Archangel Michael, stand not just beside you, but within your awareness, strengthening your perception, sharpening your instincts, guiding your attention so that you can recognize opportunities that were once invisible to you. Because now you are no longer operating at the level you once were. And this is where the true test begins. Not the test of starting, but the test of maintaining, of sustaining, of holding your ground even when the intensity increases. And as the journey deepens, you begin to feel a different kind of resistance. Not the resistance that slows you down, but the resistance that challenges your limits, that asks you to expand beyond what you previously believed possible. And in these moments, your mind may attempt to question, to analyze, to create hesitation, but something within you has already changed, because now you do not immediately listen to doubt the way you once did. Instead, you observe it, you understand it, and you continue moving forward regardless. And this is where the force becomes undeniable, because true force is not about pushing harder, it is about remaining steady under pressure. It is about staying aligned even when everything around you attempts to disrupt that alignment. And as the rider moves forward, there are moments where the path becomes more intense, more demanding. And yet, your response becomes calmer, more controlled, more precise. And this contrast is where growth becomes visible, because while the external challenge increases, your internal stability increases even more. And that is not coincidence. That is transformation. And I guide this transformation carefully. ensuring that you are never overwhelmed beyond what you can handle, but always challenged just enough to evolve. Because evolution requires pressure, it requires resistance, it requires moments where you feel stretched. And in those moments, something within you begins to activate that cannot be easily explained. A sense of clarity that cuts through confusion, a sense of direction that overrides hesitation, and a sense of strength that does not depend on circumstances. And as this strength builds, the rider begins to experience a shift in how they perceive obstacles, no longer as threats, but as part of the process, as necessary steps that refine the journey. And this shift is powerful because it removes fear from the equation and replaces it with understanding. And understanding is what allows progress to become consistent, and consistency is what leads to mastery. And as you continue forward, there comes a moment where you realize that you are no longer reacting to the journey. You are shaping it, influencing it, moving through it with intention rather than uncertainty. And this realization is the point where force transforms into control. Not control over everything, but control over yourself, over your decisions, over your direction. And in this state, the rider feels a sense of empowerment that is calm, grounded, and deeply rooted in experience. And I continue to walk with you through this phase, not as someone pushing you forward, but as someone ensuring that your foundation remains strong. Because what is being built within you now is not temporary strength, it is enduring strength. The kind that will remain even when circumstances change, even when the path shifts, even when challenges become more complex. And as the cycle continues turning, you begin to notice that even your perception of time changes. Moments feel more meaningful, actions feel more intentional, and your awareness becomes sharper, allowing you to move with greater precision. And in this precision, there is a quiet power, a force that does not need to be announced, because it is visible in how you carry yourself, how you respond, and how you continue forward without hesitation. And as this part of the journey unfolds, the rider reaches a state where movement and awareness become one, where effort and understanding align, and where progress is no longer something you chase, but something you embody. And in that embodiment, you begin to see that you were never just riding the cycle, you were becoming someone through it, someone stronger, someone clearer, someone more aligned with purpose. And this is the true force of the journey, not the speed, not the distance, but the transformation that happens within you as you continue to move forward. And I remain with you, ensuring that this transformation continues to grow, to stabilize, and to prepare you for what comes next. Because this is not the end of the path, it is only a deeper level of it. Now, as the journey reaches its final stage, there is a stillness that begins to surround the rider. Not a stillness of stopping, but a stillness of understanding. A deep recognition that everything experienced until now was never random, never wasted, and never without purpose. Because every moment, every struggle, every small victory, and every silent decision to keep going has led to this exact point. And as the cycle continues turning, the rider no longer feels the need to question the path. Because now there is trust. A trust that has been built slowly, step by step, moment by moment. And this trust is not fragile. It is strong because it has been tested through resistance, refined through challenges, and strengthened through persistence. And in this final stage, something profound begins to unfold. A realization that the journey was never just about movement. It was always about transformation, about becoming someone who could move forward regardless of uncertainty, someone who could face resistance without breaking, someone who could carry both strength and awareness at the same time. And as I, Archangel Michael, stand with you in this final moment, my presence is not to guide you as before, but to acknowledge you, to recognize the strength that has been built within you, because now you carry a level of clarity that cannot be easily shaken, a level of discipline that cannot be easily broken, and a level of awareness that allows you to see beyond immediate obstacles. And as the rider continues forward, the path begins to feel different, not because it has changed, but because you have changed. And that change is the most important part of everything that has happened, because now you are no longer approaching life as someone who is unsure. You are moving as someone who understands. And that understanding allows your actions to be more intentional, your decisions to be more aligned, and your progress to be more meaningful. And in this state, even the idea of obstacles loses its fear, because you now recognize that obstacles are not barriers, they are signals. They are indicators that you are moving into a space where growth is required, and instead of resisting them, you begin to engage with them, to learn from them, to move through them with patience and strength. And as the cycle slows down naturally, there is no sense of loss, no sense of stopping, only a deep sense of completion. Because what was meant to be learned has been learned, what was meant to be built has been built, and what was meant to be awakened within you has now fully awakened. And in this moment, the writer pauses, not because they are told to stop, but because they have reached a point of understanding where stopping is no longer the focus. Instead, reflection takes its place. And in that reflection, you begin to see the entire journey as a single, connected experience, where every part had meaning, every challenge had purpose, and every moment contributed to who you have become. And this realization brings a quiet strength, a calm confidence that does not need validation because it is already grounded within you. And as I remain beside you, my presence becomes a reminder, not of guidance, but of your own capability. Because you no longer need constant direction to move forward, you have learned how to navigate, how to adjust, how to continue even when the path is not perfectly clear. And this is the greatest achievement of the journey, not reaching a destination, but becoming someone who can continue regardless of the destination. And as the cycle finally slows to its natural pause, there is no emptiness, only completion, no fear, only clarity, and no uncertainty about what comes next, because now you understand that the journey itself was the answer, and everything you were searching for was already within you, waiting to be discovered through movement, through resistance, through persistence, and through faith. And as the final moment settles, there is a deep sense of peace, a peace that does not come from the absence of challenges, but from the understanding that you can face them, that you can move through them, and that you can grow from them. And in this peace, there is power, a quiet, undeniable power that stays with you long after the journey ends, because it is not something external, it is something you have become. And as the final chapter closes, there is no loss, only transformation, no ending, only continuation in a new form. And I, Archangel Michael, remain with you, not as a guide that must lead you forward, but as a presence that confirms what you already are, strong, aware, and ready for whatever comes next. Because now, you are no longer just a rider on the cycle. You are the force behind the movement itself.